So today I want to look at the tale of two brothers. Twin brothers, in fact. Twin brothers, but in no way could you say that they're identical twins. The names? Jacob and Esau. They were opposites. Their parents were Isaac and Rebekah, and their grandparents Abraham and Sarah. I want mainly to concentrate on two encounters with God that Jacob had, but to appreciate what happened, you've got to look at Jacob's background and character. Jacob and Esau's parents, like Abraham and Sarah before them, had been childless, but God answered their prayers, and Rebekah became pregnant. During the pregnancy, she sensed something strange happening inside her. In fact, the Bible tells us two babies were jostling inside her womb. Jacob and Esau's struggles began right there in Rebekah's womb. Rebekah asked God, "What's happening?" And God told her. Now, it's not wrong to ask God questions about our circumstances. We may get the answer directly, or through a friend, or through the Bible. Rebekah got the answer directly, and the answer which we get may surprise us. Perhaps the answer surprised her, I don't know. God's answer to Rebekah was not only that there were two sons in her womb, but two nations. One son would lead one nation and the other another. But the older would serve the younger. The sons were born. The first was hairy and red. His name was Esau. And the second was born grasping his older brother's heel. He was given the name Jacob, which means he grasps the heel, or deceiver. And this name proves to be appropriate as the two sons grow up. Esau liked hunting, and Isaac, his father, liked the meat that he killed, and so he became Dad's favourite. Jacob, on the other hand, preferred to stay home, looking after the flocks, and he became Rebekah's favourite. And this sets a dangerous precedent which plays out in the next generation. And this too is a lesson we can learn from. One day, Esau comes home from hunting, but he's so hungry that he can't wait to prepare a meal, and he wants the food that Jacob's preparing. Crafty Jacob says, "Okay, but give me your birthright in exchange." So the birthright which rightfully in law belonged to Esau when Isaac died would instead become Jacob's. The deal is struck. We later see that Isaac in old age is further tricked by Rebekah and Jacob into giving Jacob his blessing instead of Esau receiving it. When Esau finds out what's happened, and unsurprisingly, he's not best pleased. So he plots. He thinks, "I'll wait my time until Isaac dies, and then I'll kill my brother Jacob." And so comes a further twist in this tale. Rebekah learns of Esau's scheme and persuades Isaac that it would be a good idea to send Jacob to her brother Laban to find a wife. She's not very happy with Esau's Hittite wives, and she thinks it's best if Jacob find a wife from the clan. So she says, "Let's send Jacob off to Paddan Aram, to Uncle Laban's house." This human scheme might appear to be very ungodly, but God does have his hand on the situation. So separating the warring sons does lead to a blessing and the fulfillment of God's plan. God does work out his purposes through the circumstances of our lives. On his way to his uncle in Paddan Aram, Jacob has to sleep outdoors. And this is where he has the first of his two encounters with God. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway leading from earth to heaven. Angels were ascending and descending the stairway. And at the top of the stairway in heaven, there was God. And God confirmed the covenant that he'd made to Abraham. Now, we might think that a deceiving, cheating Jacob would be an unlikely person to have such an experience, but it was all part of God's purpose. A plan which would only come to fulfillment 20 or so years later. But note what happens when Jacob wakes up. He thought, surely God was in this place. God is always trying to get our attention. Very often we fail to recognize his presence. In this instance, it was so obvious Jacob couldn't miss what God was saying. And sometimes God gains our attention in a way we cannot miss. When that happens, do we say, surely God was in this place, in this situation, and I didn't know it? Or do we say, yes, God was in this place, in this situation. What does he want from me or for me? As a result of this encounter, Jacob makes a vow. He says, if God will be with me on my journey and give me food and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. The stone he had been sleeping on becomes a memorial, and Jacob promises to give 1/10 of what God gives him back to God. I've read of people making deals with God and also warnings about doing such a thing. What we can say is that in this instance, in Jacob's case, God rewarded his faith and gave him more than he expected. So off he sets to his uncle Laban's. As he approaches, he sees shepherds gathering at a well, ready to give their flocks water. And so he asks them if they know Laban. Oh yes, they know Laban. In fact, his daughter Rachel's approaching with Laban's sheep. Jacob introduces himself. Rachel goes home to tell her father, who then comes to greet Jacob and invites him into his home. In Laban, Jacob meets his match. There's numerous deceptions which take place in their relationship. Laban takes Jacob into his family, uses his shepherding skills. He asks what wages Jacob wants, to which he says he'll work for 7 years in return for Rachel as a wife. Now, Laban had 2 daughters, Rachel, who was good looking, and her older sister Leah, who perhaps wasn't as good looking. Laban agrees to Jacob's request, but his deceptive nature comes into play on the night of the marriage, when he swaps Rachel for Leah. Jacob has been deceived. He's angry, but he's determined to have Rachel as his wife, so he agrees to a further time working for Laban in order to marry her too. You can read for yourselves the twists and turns in their relationship in Genesis chapters 29 to 31. After 20 years, Jacob decides it's time to return to his homeland. He has God's promise that one day this will happen. But what about his brother Esau? How will he respond? Jacob leaves Laban's household whilst he's absent. He takes his wives and family with him, along with the possessions he's gained. There's an anxious moment when Laban pursues him, but God fulfills his promise of protection. Jacob tells his wives, your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. And when Laban catches up with him, this is how Jacob answers his father-in-law. If the God of my father had not been with me, you would have surely have sent me away empty-handed. They came to an agreement. The same God who watched over Jacob has promised to watch over all his followers. Jesus said, never will I leave you or forsake you. And this is a precious promise which we should hold on to at all times. But Jacob still has his encounter with Esau waiting him. But before that takes place, he has another encounter with God. Jacob sent his wives and children, oxen, sheep, camels, the whole lot on ahead of him, and he was alone with God. At this time, many people may feel alone. But if we're alone with God, that's a great place to be. Jacob wrestled with God. He knew he had to face Esau, who'd become very rich and powerful by this time. Did he still desire to kill his young brother? Was he still out for revenge? Jacob said to himself, I'm going to meet Esau, and I need to know that God is with me. Whatever difficulties, whatever challenges we face, we need to know that God is with us. If we don't have that assurance, then we need to spend time alone with God until we do have that assurance. Jacob remembered what had happened all those years before on his first encounter with God, and he wanted another blessing. He wanted a real experience with God, a real experience of God. And there's a lesson there for us. We shouldn't settle for a second-hand experience with God. We should press in to experience all the fullness that God wants for us, a deep relationship with him. Press on to know God in the times of when we're alone with him. Jacob came out of this encounter a changed man. His name was changed. Yes, he limped and he had that to contend with, but his name was changed by God, and there's a very significant change. Jacob the deceiver becomes Israel, which of course becomes the name of God's land and the nation to this day. We all like a story with a happy ending, and this chapter in Jacob's life does have a happy ending. He looks up, he sees Esau approaching him with 400 men, but they came not to attack, but they came in peace. The brothers were reconciled and did indeed become leaders of nations. So, from this tale of two brothers, we can learn certain things. First, God answers prayer. God can even take cheats and deceivers and turn their lives around. We learn that God always fulfills his promises, but he does so in his time and in his way. We learn that God does provide protection and provision for his people. And we learn that we should always be alert to hearing from God, particularly when we spend time alone with him in prayer, seeking his presence, seeking his blessing. May the Lord bless you.